The title of this one is Making Difficult Decisions, and the presenting topic for that exploration will be decisions around sexual orientation and gender identity by people in the church. Tomorrow, we'll have a third edition of this workshop called Taking Action, where we'll talk about economic justice and how we move from difficult decisions to action. And I hope you'll join us for that. My name is Brian Ellison. I'm the Executive Director of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, a group that has long walked with LGBTQIA+ people and the church of which we are a part. In our case, that's the Presbyterian Church USA. We know we have many churches represented here today. All of them are faced with difficult decisions, often about openness and authenticity, about self-protection and survival, about living with fear or living with joy. What do those decisions have to say to all of us about not only the lives of queer people, but the lives of all people? Our panel will help us start a conversation today, and later the Reverend Dr. Clemens will close us with a few minutes of teaching, helping connect us with resources to continue this exploration in our own contexts. But first, let's meet our panel, and I'm going to introduce them to you by asking them all to answer a question. I'm also going to put them on the screen. So if you're watching in speaker view, you will be able to see just the members of the panel highlighted. You're certainly still welcome to watch in gallery view if you'd like to see everybody's reactions. That's fine too. And so the question I'd like to ask each of you as we get started is if you will try to connect this topic to your own story and experience. We've spoken, all of us, and you've each shared that one of the most difficult, complicated decisions that you personally have had to make in your life is the decision to come out. So let me ask you to share some of that story with us briefly, talking about how you got to the place of making the decision you did and why. Let me start with Elder Dr. Marty Reitmeyer, who is a certified Christian educator and a former lecturer at Columbia Theological Seminary. Marty, thanks.
There we go. Hi, I'm Marty, and I'm going to start with a quote that says, "Once in a while, right in the middle of an ordinary life, love gives us a fairy tale." It was given to me by a niece who took this picture of me and my wife at her wedding about 3 years ago. No, she only got married 2 years ago. We beat her. I will start by saying when I was 5 years old in 1957, I attended the wedding of a young woman who had babysat with all the younger half of my family. I'm one of 10 kids. And I remember standing on the back pew of the sanctuary thinking, this is really pretty, but I'm never going to do this. 5 years old. Took me 60 years till I did do it. So I was 65 when I finally got married. And it was done right here underneath. Well, you can't see how beautiful the arch is, but there's an arch right behind me. And we were married right there by a Presbyterian minister named Kim Clayton, who has become a very, very good friend of ours. And in front of Julie's whole family and part of my family, those that I lived closest to who could get there. Oh, and Julie's former husband with his wife. They have led me to understand how you can love someone deeply, but not be in love with them, and be able to mutually part, but stay best friends. It's just amazing. And it's a delight to be a part of her family. The next major time that I had, I knew by the time I was in high school that I was a lesbian, but I did not. My dad was a minister. My mother was the choir director. Fairly, very liberal when it came to civil rights movements, but not at all understanding or open to this particular episode. So I never told them, either one of them. And I struggled with it for a long time and did not tell anyone for the longest time until I finally went, after I graduated went to college, thought about being a librarian, had already been accepted to Emory's library school when we took a trip to New York to visit my brother David. And on the way home, my mother and several siblings and I stopped at PSCE. And I literally met the president and filled out my application in longhand on yellow legal pad and handed it in and turned around and went back up there to school a week later. It was the right decision. It led to all the other things that I got to do, including being the resource center director for our presbytery for 20 years, my most favorite job. So I probably would have been okay being a library science major too and getting her master's in that. But what really led to the emphasis of telling everybody is that in 1985, I spent a year in China. And I went there, I was in a church position and resigned from that and went because I knew I just needed to deal with the situation as best I could. So I lived in a dorm with 36 African men who were all in school in China learning agriculture. I just laughed and laughed when God put me in that position because it was just wonderful. I became fairly good friends with all of them and was never tempted whatsoever in any way. But every evening I would walk around. There was a track around the soccer field right behind my dorm where I had more than one room. I had an apartment there, but I would walk around the track saying, God, either heal me or give me peace. Either heal me or give me peace. And I heard God say to me as audibly and in a man's voice that sounded like my father's, which I just to this day love that was the manifestation of God, to say, Mardi, I love you just the way you are. A peace came over me that never went away. To this day, it has never gone away. So when I came back, I knew that I had that to hang on to and went right back into church work. And, but I still didn't tell anybody. And I was working at a church on the north side of Atlanta, and they got a new minister. And within, 3 months, he called me into his office and he said, there are rumors going around that you're gay and I would like for you to leave. I just don't want to deal with that controversy. I'm a brand new minister here and I don't want to have to deal with that. And I said, well, I am. I said it out loud to someone I hardly knew well and said, I will leave, but you got to give me an opportunity to have another reason. So I went back to school again and got a degree to teach public school. But I never followed up on that either because I got invited by another church to come work for them, even knowing the situation. In fact, knowing the situation. And ended up from there having just a wonderful life in the church because Atlanta was on the forefront of being in favor of gay rights and now all the rights for everyone. Became great friends with Aaron Swinson. But the other major part of that was I went to APSI in Oakland, California, and I couldn't remember the actual year, but it was shortly after I came back from China. And I was walking around the marketplace and kept walking past this particular booth, and it was being held by Janie Spar, who ended up being invited to be the pastor in Rochester, New York, and the Presbyterian turned it down because she was gay. And that church went out and hired her to be an evangelist for that All May Freely Serve. And she came up to me when I was walking around, because I kept walking past her booth, just thinking, and she came up to me and said, do you want to talk? And it was the first time that I was able to literally just share my whole story with someone that I knew was going to understand. And we became best friends. And I ended up being the evangelist for that All May Freely Serve for the South. and had the opportunity to go into churches all over Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, and still kept my job. They didn't mind, and they were happy to let me go do these things. So I ended up at one point serving both presbyteries of Greater Atlanta and Cherokee Presbytery, who could not be any different. Cherokee was very conservative, but I was working with the youth. And a sidelight of that is that I had never worked with youth before. It had always either been children or adults. And I was telling that I've had 5 of those 12 kids end up becoming ministers or working in the church in some capacity. And all 5 of them have told me it was because of the relationship they had with me, which I thought I was doing a pretty crummy job myself since I'd never done it before. But you never know how God works. And it's just wonderful. And then I got hired to work at Covenant Presbyterian Church, where I met Julie. And I was open to the search committee. They knew, and the search committee told Julie to come to the resource center and check me out, which she gladly did. Little did I know what was up in the future. But over the course of the years, we really decided that we were meant for each other. And we bought the house we're in now 24 years ago. We finally, when Georgia passed the law that we could get married, we did. And still very active in the church, and ended up the last couple of years being the Presbyterian moderator and chair of council. And I think, man, thank you, God, for telling me I was loved just the way I was and believing it, because I have been shown it over and over and over by the church itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Marty. Amen. And it is such a powerful thing to hear your story, your as a real pioneer in the Presbyterian Church in this regard, and the pioneers you've come in contact with, Janie Spar and Aaron Swenson and others whose names are in sort of the Hall of Fame for those of us who've come after, and I'm grateful. The Reverend Danny Morales is pastor of New Covenant Presbyterian Church in Miami, Florida. And Danny, I invite you to tell us your story of the difficult decision to come out.
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Greetings from Miami. So I was one of those kids that at a very young age was pretty clear in what I liked. I still remember the first time I had gone out with my dad. I think I was 5 years old, more or less. And he had gone to pay a bill for auto insurance, and there was a gentleman in the office. I still remember, blonde, green eyes. And as soon as my dad did his transaction and I walked out, I remember telling my dad, "Wow, that's a very handsome man," in a way that a 5-year-old could actually speak those words. And I remember Dad scolding me for that. But over the course of the years, it's not something that faded away. You know, I dealt with that as an adolescent, as a teenager, and it was a bit challenging for me because I grew up in a very conservative home. My family, I was born in the Baptist tradition. My family was one of the pillars of the church. There were, back in 1971, 1972, they were the second family that joined this small congregation of Cuban immigrants. And I was born, several years later. So I was kind of like the baby of the church. But all throughout my time at this church, I sporadically would hear sermons condemning homosexuality, and that was a guilt that I carried inside, and nobody knew this. I mean, not even my best friends from grade school, elementary, nothing. I really kept that to myself, and it was a pretty heavy weight to carry. Fast forward to graduating from high school and my poor attempt at dating a young lady, which that didn't turn out too well. It actually helped me realize, who am I trying to kid? This is not the life that I am meant to live. I need to be, I need to just embrace the fact that I'm gay, that I am attracted to men. I need to figure out how to work through that. And so right after high school, I landed a job at a credit union. And a couple of years after that, there was another gentleman who was hired to work in the accounting department. I was working as a file clerk at the time, and as tends to be the case for those of us who identify as LGBTQIA, we can kind of get an idea of when someone in our surroundings might identify that way or not, and so he had that inkling of me, and we friended each other and would start conversing. And that kind of led me to verbally say, yes, I am gay, and this is who I am. At which point he sternly suggested that I be open and honest with my family, specifically with my parents. And that was, and still to this day is, the hardest decision I've ever had to make, because it at that point in time, at 19, almost 20, it wasn't in the cards for me. It wasn't something that I was anticipating doing. I didn't have any circle of influence that identified as gay. We're talking about the mid 90s here. It wasn't a conversation that was generally spoken about. You knew, here and there, oh, so and so's gay, or so and so is like that. And as, in the Latin culture and Cuban culture, for instance, it's very you're likely to hear somebody refer to a gay person as, oh, they're like that. They're different. So we knew about that, but it wasn't something that was spoken clearly. But this coworker of mine really pushed me to talk to my parents. I was very apprehensive about doing it, although there were times that I thought my mother suspected. Prior to me telling her, she had made some comments that led me to think, oh, well, maybe mom knows that I'm gay, and who knows. But then one day, I came home from work, and it was just me and mom. My dad hadn't gotten home yet, and I figured, this is it. This is the time for me to do it. And in the course of our conversation, I just blurted it out, and oh dear. That was that didn't necessarily go as planned. There were, my mom said several things to me that I could almost still hear her tell me I was crazy. I needed to go see a psychologist. Oh, I hadn't met the right woman yet. I don't know what I'm talking about. And then, of course, she told me, don't tell anybody, be quiet. And I just remember going to my room and bawling my eyes out, asking myself, what the hell did you just do? What did you do? What did you do? Over the course of the coming days and weeks and months ahead, my mother my mother took care of letting the rest of the family know, which kind of saved me from having to say it, specifically to my dad. And that was hard for me. I always had a wonderful relationship with my dad. I was the youngest, so I was, dad. I was my father's shadow, is how I always refer to it. And my dad didn't take it well. My dad cornered me in the church one evening that I had gone over. I had the keys to the church. I was the church musician. I played the piano at the time, so I used to go to the church and practice there. And one day that I had done that, my dad followed me. I didn't realize this, but he followed me and he cornered me and, come sit here with me, open the Bible, look what scripture says, blah, blah. And it was difficult. It wasn't I love you, son kind of deal. So the next few years were kind of tough. they became even tougher at the church too, because folks in the congregation started finding out, made my life rather challenging, made it even more challenging for my parents, which that was more offensive to me. You know, one of the things I said to the pastor at the time who had asked me about it, and I admitted it, I just, you know, I always said, this is who I am, but it doesn't define me totally. There's so many other aspects to my life than just being gay. And also, you should know that I come to church to worship God. I don't come here to cruise or to look for men or anything like that. But I had asked him, whatever you have to say or speak to about this topic, come talk to me directly. Don't get my parents involved. And that didn't go well either. A couple of years later, the church had hired another pastor who had just came in from Cuba, significantly more conservative, and there was a family in the church that had been having issues with the fact that I was gay, and with my own family too. And so this family made it a point to let the pastor know, which the pastor then made it a point to address me, corner me again, is how I refer to the incident, and had asked me to first address the issue. Oh, I hear that you are advertising looking for men. I actually had a profile on Match.com. It's the only way I knew how to date or try to date. I didn't have that many gay friends at the time. But that's not the spin that he was putting on it. Either way, I never denied any of it. I accepted it and accepted it openly. To which he then asked that I step down from all leadership positions that I had in the church, because in his words, I wasn't a moral fit to even stand at the pulpit. And so I took it upon myself to just leave the church. And it worked out fine. God works in mysterious ways. After leaving the Baptist church, I made my way to Riviera Presbyterian Church in Miami, which is to this day the only More Light and Covenant Network affiliated congregation of the PCUSA. And that's where I met the Reverend Dr. Lori Krause and her family and that congregation that were so generous and so genuine in opening their hearts to me, nourishing my spirit, nourishing my soul. And I felt like I belonged. Gone was this guilt of, oh my God, that I lived with so many years in the Baptist church. I felt welcomed, I felt loved. Enough to say that over the course of the years, I prayerfully considered going to seminary, something that I hadn't done when I was in the Baptist church. I thought I was going to die a church pianist like every other gay man hiding inside the closet in a Baptist church. But God had other plans. And in retrospect, I appreciate Brian when we had these conversations a couple of weeks ago. I appreciate Brian asking about this, because I am so grateful. I still can't remember the gentleman's name that I worked with 20-something, 30-something years ago, but I am so grateful to him for telling me, be who you are and be honest and genuine with your family. Don't hide yourself from your parents. And I'm grateful he pushed me. It was a hard choice, but I'm grateful he did, because I ended up having the absolute best relationship I could have ever imagined with my father. It took me 20-something years to get there, but I did it. And I did it because I was the same person I always was. I was genuine, I was honest, and I just showed my parents love. So thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate your honesty and your story. Finally, let me introduce you to Ms. Iris Marie Farley. She is a deacon. She is a human resources executive in Illinois. And Iris, I'm really grateful for you sharing your story of your fairly recent decision with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I've been sitting here listening, and I didn't have a chance to hear Marty and Danny, your stories beforehand. But what was occurring to me as I look at the block of the four of us here is that I am in many ways the beneficiary of the work and the leadership that the two of you and Brian that you have shown. And if I go back and start to think about my journey towards coming out and connection to the church, it really, for me, most clearly began in 2013. I attended a Covenant Network conference that was in Chicago. And as had kind of become normal for me, if there was an opportunity to engage with anything in work or in my faith community around queer folks, I would do that. I sought those opportunities out. And I remember at that conference in particular, there was a session on trans people in the church. I thought, you know what, this is interesting. I should go here. In the last year, I find myself looking back on my life and finding these scraps and bits and pieces that were signposts, but that it just took a while for me to put it together. I didn't have that experience of at 3 or 5 or 7 years old saying, I want to be a girl. There are other ways that it showed itself. And even as recently as 2019, I was working with a therapist, and there were times, and she reminds me of this sometimes now, where I said, I don't know what's going on here. I know I'm not trans, but there's something going on and I need to understand it better. And so in retrospect, I think my trans identity was with me for a much, much longer time than I was ready to acknowledge, ready to understand. It kind of grew from a whisper to a conversational voice. And about a year ago, January of 2020, it became a shout. I woke up literally on January 1st of 2020 with this question on my mind of, am I trans? And I went to Google and I looked it up. And the first thing I found said, well, you should know that cisgender people don't ask that question. And I thought, oh, well, glib, but okay, I'll keep looking at that. And then found some other resources that really got me thinking much more about it and trying to understand. I had the benefit of being part of an affirming church in PCUSA here in Chicago, and that's been wonderful throughout. Having a queer pastor, and being able to I don't know, it's that idea that representation matters. I was able to look and see, and there was never a moment's doubt for me that my denomination, my faith tradition wouldn't accept this. And I know that's not unilateral. I know that's not every church, but I knew that there was acceptance within the church for me. And so that was never a stumbling block. The things that were difficult in my decision were thinking about my marriage and thinking about my job. From a marital standpoint, my wife and I have talked since I came out about the fact that we felt in some ways like we had just hit our stride at about 25, 26 years. And so that was on my mind when I remember walking down the street near our house and thinking, how can I do this? This is working now. It's working how we've always wanted it. And what I realized was it was working because of honesty and integrity. It was working because of changes I had made in my life to be more honest and to be more upfront and to try to preserve that relationship by hiding such an important part of me would defeat the purpose. It would be going back to a place we had been to before. And I knew well that, this identity that I kind of kept in a box, I didn't realize it at the time, but it kept trying to escape. And when it tried to escape, it did so in ways that weren't honest and that did cause hurt. And so I had to look at it and say, is it going to cause hurt? Is it going to be difficult? Yes, it is. But keeping it in is going to cause hurt and difficulty to me and to everyone else as well. And when I came out to my wife, I was supported and affirmed in that decision, because while it's had its difficult parts for both of us and for her in particular, it has also been, she's never wavered in her support of me being myself. And that's a gift. Work was another story. I work for a Japanese company that manufactures construction and mining and forestry equipment. And I've thought often in the last year that you couldn't find a more male ethos if you went searching for it. It just felt so male. And I didn't know what to expect, because there aren't any other out trans executives, certainly, and no other out trans people that I know in our business. And so I didn't have that template, right? I didn't have that way of saying this is going to be okay. And so there was a risk there. And I've been very fortunate in that people across the board have accepted this and are excited about it and have been supportive. And with each conversation of support and acceptance, I found myself becoming more confident in this, in myself. And, by the end of 2020, I'd come out to my family. I'd come out at my church. I'd come out to work. I'd social media. And January 1st, I started living full-time as Iris. And it's been a lovely thing. Every day's a learning experience. But that decision on that walk from the hot dog place down the street back home was really critical to making that decision for honesty and integrity. That was the big moment for me.
Iris, thank you so much for sharing your story and helping us get another perspective on how we go about making really difficult and important decisions. I want to invite in the next 10 or 15 minutes some questions. If you have questions for our panel, put them in the chat box. You can either post them publicly there to everyone, or you can send them directly to me. It's up to you. I want to give our panelists just a chance to talk a little bit together. I guess a question that I might start with, each of you talk about the support you've received in making your decision. For the sake of those in the workshop here, what are the marks of the kind of community or space that makes it safe to come out or to do some other hard but important thing? How do you suggest that people create the kind of community and space that is safe for hard decisions, based on your experience or what you've observed? And any of you can jump in with it. Marty, you're muted. Go ahead.
Yeah. When I met Janie Spar the first time, the fact that she came up to me rather than me having to come to her was a big decision. That, all right, she already knows what's going on with me, so it's going to be easy to talk. And it was. And so I know the church that I attend now is very supportive and very good about church members. It has a reputation. So we do have a lot of, especially gay men come to church just to try us out. And I don't recall ever seeing anybody who wasn't greeted warmly and talked to before and after church and saying, we hope you come back. And it's amazing how many people do come back because of that instant. You are welcome here. Makes a big difference.
I think for me, looking for those signs of acceptance was really important. And I'm thinking of work right now in particular, where there wasn't anything specifically that said, we support our trans employees or we support LGBTQIA employees. But we did talk a lot about courageous authenticity. We did talk a lot about diversity generally, and that's still a journey for us. But I was able to point to some of those things, especially in the months where I was thinking about how do I come out? How do I, in this conversation I'm going to have with our CEO, what are the things I want to have at the ready if he reacts badly? And I was able to kind of pull all those things together and say, okay, you know what? We do more than we give ourselves credit for. I think it's a thing we need to be more open about. And fortunately, I seem to have opened a door to that, but it's definitely something that I know makes a difference. I know would have made even more of a difference for me if I didn't have to search for it, if it was right there. You know, whether it's having an employee resource group that looks at you know, that is an LGBTQIA employee resource group, or whether it's, you know, being loud about our benefits that we have for trans employees and their trans family members. Those are the kinds of things that give a signal, and an important signal that says this is okay. This is there's a safety here, because that was the fear of the unknown was very much a part of, you know, the middle part of 2020 for me.
You know, I want to ask about Danny. Did you want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of to spin off of what Marty had said. I think what's helpful is when people approach you with openness and honesty in a way that transmits comfort and peace. I mean, that's what this coworker of mine did for me, and based on Marty's experience, I'm pretty sure that's what Janie Spar did to her as well, and it gave her a sense of peace and security. I think that so many people say, "Oh, I welcome everybody. I love everybody." And sometimes that's more lip service than it is something genuine. When you're genuine about welcoming everybody, you don't really have to advertise it, and you don't have to flaunt it in the air. I welcome everybody. It's just something that oozes out of you naturally, and you could see it from the heart. And I think in this day and age, it was challenging for me 20-something years ago. It's not to say that today's a little better, but we could do a lot better at just letting that openness and genuineness flow out of us in such a way that's so natural that we don't have to tell people we accept everybody. People from all walks of life naturally gravitate to us because they can sense it in just the way we carry ourselves. That's what I wanted to chime in.
It's a great addition. It strikes me, I talk a lot with congregations about how do they tell people that they're welcoming, and should they put the banner up above their door that says all are welcome? Like, well, you can put that banner up, but first make sure it's true, and then know that LGBTQIA plus people in particular probably don't believe you just from the banner, that you're going to have to show it. Let me ask one more question. Actually, I'm not going to ask my question. I'm going to ask a question out of the chat box. Debbie asks, what is the best way to be the bridge in a family torn by an LGBTQ plus member? I don't know exactly what Debbie means by that, but what's the best way to be a bridge in a family where there's been hurt or separation around these difficult decisions?
For me, my brother Joe was a part of the Presbyterians for Renewal, not just a part of, he was the leader of it.
The executive director, right?
Yeah. And he has never come to terms with my sexuality. And only recently, within the last year, has he begun to surface when families have Zoom links. And I think it has to do with the fact that we just this last year I had a niece, transgender to male, and is now a nephew. And he came to a family wedding last summer for the first time since he had transgendered. And everyone was so welcoming of him that he has been a part now. He has just really jumped back into it, which is wonderful. And I think Joe realized that he's missing out. His oldest daughter is married and has 5 kids, and she will not come to any family reunion because she does not want them around me or my nephew. And it's just, I think she's the one that's losing out. So I don't know what you do about that. You keep reaching, but some are never going to change their minds and some are. So it's been a number of years for Joe and I. So.
And Brian, Marty is right. That's what I was asking. I have a sister, and we have half the family that will invite her places and half the family that won't.
Yeah. Okay.
Marty was answering the question that I was asking.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the clarifying, Debbie, and thank you, Marty. And let me invite the others to answer, but let me expand the question further to a question that came to me privately in the chat box too, who says, as a pastor, how can I be equipped and supported in beginning this conversation and creating a culture of radical hospitality and welcoming love? So you can answer about the family bridge question, but also the question of how we as pastors or church leaders of all kinds can create an environment that provides for this sort of radical hospitality that you at times have experienced and maybe at other times haven't.
I want to touch on the bridging the family part. I don't know that I have the answer to it, or I think what Marty said was spot on. I think people have to come to terms with that by themselves. How do you be a bridge? Through love. One of the reasons I was able to create a relationship with my father before he passed was because I chose to be loving to my dad. And I chose not to let, I chose to lead my life with love, with him, with my mother. I've done the same with my siblings. I have a sister who, growing up, she and I were very close. And over the course of the years, she is a very conservative evangelical. So we're totally on opposite sides of the theological spectrum, and she chooses to keep her distance, but that's her choice. I took it very personal for many years because we grew up together and we were best of buddies, and I loved hanging out with her. And you know, when her children were very young, my nephews and nieces, I loved hanging out with them. I still love hanging out with them today. I have a great relationship, particularly more with the girls, ironically, than I do with the boys. I'm not sure why, but I've come to terms with the fact that that's her walk and her journey. The only thing that I can do, as my mom says, is just love and pray, love and pray. And it's, you know, it sounds sounds cliche-ish maybe, but honestly, that's all that one can do, just love. And to speak about the church, to speak about the church briefly, I'll tell you, I pastor a small Black congregation in the Liberty City area in Miami. They were one of the first racially integrated churches of the Presbyterian Church of the South. And for me, it's always fascinating that they called me to be their, I'm not a called and installed, I'm a temporary supply, but that they hired me to be their pastor, knowing that I am not Black and I'm openly gay. And their slogan is a church for all peoples. And I cannot tell you the many times that I have preached just on that specific topic of a church, what it means to be a church for all people. Usually what I like to do is I like to challenge them. Look around the church. Are all people here? And if they aren't, then why? What is it that we're doing? I mean, we can't just say that we're a church for all people, and then when someone who's not all walks into the sanctuary, all of a sudden we're looking at them like, who's that? And why are they here? That's not how you be a church for all people. I had an opportunity years ago to work with the United Church of Christ, and one of the things the pastor used to say was, look around at who's missing and ask yourselves, why are they not here? And so that's a good, and I've taken that with myself, and I've asked my church the same thing. Every so often I'll throw that, we're a church for all people, but is everybody here?
It's a good word. I'm sorry to be trying to move us along. I'm going to give Iris the final word.
Just a few quick thoughts, just based on what I've seen more so. I didn't mention it earlier, but my wife is actually a Presbyterian minister as well. And so I've watched what she's tried to do in this space, and I've watched what my pastor's done. And I think there's for those that aren't in the LGBTQIA community, learn, consume writing and art from LGBTQIA people, and try to get a different sense of perspective, maybe. Signaling, like I mentioned before, but also acting. So I agree with Danny and Marty. It's not enough just to signal, but I do believe that signaling is important. It lets people know it's safe. And then the last bit, having a plan. I saw Marion talk
Sometimes
about,
the signal is the entrance so that people can see the actions.
Yes. And Marion mentioned on the chat a renaming ceremony. And I just actually had one of those right on Epiphany. And it was amazing and kind of emotional about it, just even talking about it, but it was great. And but you know what? My pastor had a plan. She brought that to me. It wasn't something I had to ask for. It wasn't something I had to, I wouldn't have thought of it. But when I first told her, she said, yeah, we should do this. We should engage in this and make sure that we make a big deal of it. And the fact that she had that at the ready, I think really gave me peace in the idea that I was in good hands.
What a gift. Well, I want to say thank you to most especially to Marty and to Danny and to Iris. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, being vulnerable and authentic with us as you have been with the world. And someone's phone is ringing as well. Let me also recognize now I'm going to go ahead and mute Paul and let me invite all of you to stay muted. Let me call on the Reverend Dr. Von Clemens. He is a pastor and educator, honorably retired, also past president of APSI and a coach for Vibrant Faith Ministries. He's going to close our time with some teaching on how we can continue this conversation, some resources and things to think about. Vaughn, welcome, and thanks for your patience. You're muted, Vaughn.
I am muted. There we go. Okay. Thank you. I want to take just a few minutes, and some people have said and reminded me that teaching is just helping others become aware of what they already know. So I offer these thoughts to you as a cisgendered older white guy who's tried to be an ally to this movement for years, and just offer them to you and ask you to evaluate them based on your experience and the wisdom of that you know already. So I want to share my screen with you to there we go. You should be seeing that now.
Yep.
I want to talk about this in terms of two life forces that are at work here in all living systems, and they're the forces of togetherness and separateness, built into the very fabric of life, even at the cellular level for all living creatures. And all individual cells and human beings strive to be connected to other people and other things. But once individual elements group together to make a system, the forces of togetherness often become stronger than the forces of individuation, or as it's often said, differentiation. So the system, whether that's the culture, the organization, the church, or the family, will try to maintain the status quo and draw individuals back in when they begin to separate and become an individual or become autonomous. Healthy systems allow individuals and groups to be themselves, who they truly are, while at the same time maintaining relationships with the rest of the system. And part of making decisions, difficult decisions, is how you separate from a system or group that wants you to be just like them when you know you're something else. And so this process is sometimes called self-differentiation. It happens when individuals or groups claim an identity or take a stand on a personal or communal issue. It's being an I when everyone and everything else is saying we. It begins with clarity about one's own, whether that's individual or a group's values, principles, and beliefs. And to do so increases the integrity and wholeness that we experience as individuals, as our identity and actions are aligned with our values, principles, and beliefs. And yet, when we do that, it risks alienations from others as the system tries to get us back to where they're comfortable with us being. It takes great courage and endurance to be separate, to be an individual, and together to be a part of a community or a system of relationships. So here's a path to wholeness for both individual and groups decision-making processes. First of all, is to clarify your mission. And that might be your personal or your group's values, principles, and beliefs that lead you to action. Knowing who you are sometimes takes a while to get to where you are, and sometimes it takes a life of experiences to open that up for you, or other people speaking to you. But knowing who you are and what you stand for is an important first step. The second is to stay connected. And by that, what I mean is seek to intentionally remain in relationships with others in your system. And I want to make a distinction here because it's possible to be in a relationship if only one person wants that to happen. So I can be in a relationship with somebody even though they don't return that. Reconciliation in a relationship requires two people, but the relationship only requires one. And so if I take the initiative to stay in a relationship with other people, it opens the possibility that something might change down the road. The third thing is to stay calm. One of the crucial things is to work to reduce your own anxiety and reactiveness. You're not going to be able to control how other people react or what they say, but you can control how you react and your own responses. And the more anxious you are, the more difficult it becomes to manage what's going on. Finally, stay the course. To anticipate and prepare for the inevitable sabotage that's going to take place. The system, your relationships, the forces will try to make your I conform to the we. And that will take place in so many insidious ways, and sometimes very overt and sometimes covert ways. But staying the course is one of the hardest things once you've taken a stand. Some necessary conditions for all this to take place is a safe place to nurture the emerging I. Now, in groups, at a group setting, whether that's in a church making a difficult decision, or in a family or community, I would suggest that you create a process that ensures a safe environment where everyone is respected and valued. For individuals, that may mean seeking out and being open to someone who can serve as an ally or as a mentor for you as you go through your decisions and as you go through taking a stand. A continuing nurture is necessary to support you after you've taken the risk of being a true self, and affiliating with a supportive community, whether that's locally or nationally, is always a great thing. But to help others as you have been helped, as you find other people in a similar situation, reaching out to them and becoming an advocate or an activist yourself to help people as they wrestle with these difficult decisions. Finally, some recommendations, and these will all be posted. So if you find it hard to read on here, all the links will be available to you in the materials on the website. But I'll just mention a couple of things real quickly here. In terms of processes for individual and group decisions, I'd highly recommend the document that the Presbyterian Church created a number of years ago called Seeking to be Faithful Together, Guidelines for Presbyterians in Times of Disagreement. And it offers a set of principles and processes to help groups deal with very difficult and often heated topics. And committing to that at the beginning is a great way to provide a safe environment. The other thing is done by the Kaleidoscope Institute, in which Eric Law worked, and he's the one who made famous the mutual invitation process. But this document, Respectful Communication Guidelines and Mutual Invitation, provides a set of principles like the guidelines for being faithful together, but it also provides the process for mutual invitation, which guarantees a safe space for people who are have minority voices or who don't normally speak up. And then the organizations that are out there, I just listed 3 of them here. There are probably many more, but these may well be better known, is the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, which Brian can speak to if you want to hear from one of the key people in that group. The More Light Presbyterians, which was mentioned, one of the churches down in Miami, which I happen to know that church as well. And then That All May Freely Serve, as also was mentioned in the conversation. All these groups are national advocacy groups to support people dealing with difficult decisions, particularly around the LGBTQI plus community. So that's all I have to say. And I think I'll stop and see if there's any questions about that.
We have time for a minute or two of questions for Vaughn, if anyone has any. All right. Well, Vaughn Clemens, thank you so much for your teaching. And are those resources going to be available on the webpage for this workshop?
Yes, I'll upload the PowerPoint and a document that has all that stuff on there, so people have that.
Thanks so much, Vaughn. I'm mindful of the fact that in many there are other denominations represented here besides the PCUSA, and if you want information, there are groups that work on these issues and offer support and advocacy in most denominations, and I'd be glad to connect you with people who I've had the privilege of getting to know across our ecumenical world. All right. If there are no other questions, we'll wrap up right on time. It really has been a privilege and a pleasure to be part of this workshop with you. Thanks again to Marty Reitmeyer and Danny Morales and Iris Farley, to Vaughn Clemens, and my thanks to the APSI Diversity Task Force for the opportunity to host this and to put this together. Look forward, for those of you who can join us tomorrow for workshop C3. I know you have a lot of great workshop choices. That one will focus on kind of the next step after you've made a difficult decision, if you've had a difficult conversation, how do you convert that to action? And we'll focus that around the topic of economic justice. We have some great panelists tomorrow for that conversation. Alonzo Johnson, who works with self-development of people, Andrew Connors, who works with community organizing in Baltimore, as well as a pastor, June Lorenzo, who is a human rights attorney and a judge. It really will be a great conversation. Hope you'll plan on joining us then. I believe Dr. Paul Roberts will be doing the teaching section at the end of that workshop, so you won't want to miss it. Join us for that, and thanks again for being part of today's conversation. Blessings. Bye-bye.